Thanks so much. So welcome to our January 26th meeting. As we get started today, we always just want to embed ourselves in who we are working to serve and how through our mission here at DESE, which is to bring anti-racist, inclusive, multilingual, multicultural approaches to the work that we're doing. So that's at the front and center of our thinking as we work to really do good things by students and really work on behalf of the children and families who we serve in a collaborative way. And that's what we're here to do today, that we get to come together today to learn together, to ask questions, and to get stronger, to be able to do this work well. So on our agenda, we're thinking about some special education updates today, an update on the new IEP, and then coming back to this theme of general supervision. We've hit on this in all of our meetings this year, and we're just going to keep at it as we talk about what's coming next or what has actually happened in the way of LAA determinations, and actually some information about significant disproportionality. And then, as you know, we're out right now for public comment. It actually closes today on our draft procedures for resolving complaints and our monitoring functions. So really glad to talk about next steps related to those important documents, and we'll make sure that there's time at the end for your questions. So let's jump in on those special education updates. So first of all, really just want to start by acknowledging that there's some great new information from the U.S. Department of Education about assistive technology. And so just this week, the Office of Education Technology and OSERS released or actually OSEP, I do apologize, released a comprehensive package of advice and guidance related to assistive technology. Really you can see the bullet points there, just increased understanding about AT, dispel common misconceptions, and provide examples of how AT can be used for students with disabilities under the different requirements of IDA. And I think this is really relevant and timely, and we've been getting a lot of questions about assistive technology in relation to the new IEP. And I think, the new IEP really calls out assistive technology. I think helps us sort of all stop and think about its relevancy, its necessity for our students, and where it would show up in the IEP itself. So if we say that a student has an assistive technology need on the new IEP, we just want to know, is that going to be accommodations and modifications? Would that be services? Would that be goals? Would that be under additional information? Really, making sure that, again, if a student has an AT need, that it runs like a thread through the IEP, that it can show up wherever it's necessary in order to make sure that students are able to use AT to its fullest to meet their educational needs and really draw on their strengths. So I think this is really timely. I know that we've been asked, what does DESE have right now to support AT? And we do have guidance on assistive technology, but it's always just something you always have to stay on top of, right? Because AT is constantly changing and constantly evolving. And so I really appreciate that we have this additional guidance right now from our partners at the U.S. Department of Education. It just couldn't be more timely and responsive to a lot of the questions that we're getting right now. So just a reminder, there are kind of two parts to this. There's a Dear Colleague letter. This is where OSERS comes in from the Assistant Secretary of Education. And then this, I think, very kind of accessible and easily kind of user-friendly information about the myths and facts surrounding AT. So I'd encourage you to click on those links and take a look just to get to see what the U.S. Department of Education has shared this week. And I think that a lot of this is sort of turnkey. You could give this to other members of your teams, people who are maybe still struggling with the use of AT or who have some knowledge. This might kind of help to beef them up even further. So I hope you'll look at this yourself, but then also share it with those who could benefit from this as well. I want to just turn our attention to students who are experiencing homelessness. We know that we have more students right now experiencing homelessness in the state, particularly because of the influx of migrant families. What the Healy administration has called this increase of migrant families. We also know that there are lots and lots of ways, though, that students experience homelessness, perhaps doubling up, perhaps being in shelters. But really, we think this is timely and relevant, not just for the communities that have experienced the increase in emergency shelters, but really for every district that is thinking and maybe just needing a quick refresher on child find and the evaluation process for children who are experiencing homelessness. So what I've done for you all today is to draw on the questions and answers from the federal guidance, from the US Department of Education's guidance from 2008, which is still relevant now, but we've overlaid Massachusetts requirements on top of it. So while what I'm sharing is based on this, we made sure that we added Massachusetts language to this, because there are some differences between federal requirements and where state requirements go just a couple steps further that are very important and relevant to know. So the 2008 guidance really starts with this idea that students who are experiencing homelessness might be at greater risk for having undiagnosed disabilities. So I think that's important for us all just to keep front and center. I think what's important about the second bullet, and I won't read the whole thing to you, but the idea of the second bullet is that our child find efforts need to extend to where children are experiencing homelessness. Where are they residing while they are homeless? And so thinking about getting child find notifications, child find posters, the ones that you already have, the ones you already send out to those places where our children are living now. So the shelters, the emergency shelters, transitional shelters, independent living programs. And this really varies, right? We have a state that's both rural and urban, suburban, metro, a small state with a lot of different ways that people live. And so homelessness is occurring in many different ways in the state. And so how do I would ask you to think about how can you get your child find information, take the posters, take the letters, and here we are in January, this would be a good time to get them out to those places where students are experiencing homelessness. And so thank you for considering doing that, as we just really want to make sure that those services that are being provided through sort of human resource, like human development services, human support services, those providers can be aware of supporting child find as well, just as much as we want that pediatrician to support child find, just the same way that we want a community-based preschool to support child find. We also want shelters to be able to support child find as well. So once we get that word out and start that process for evaluation, just a reminder that the evaluation for all students has to be done in a timely manner without undue delay. And that I think this next bullet is really important, and it's just good to remind ourselves of this, is that any parent, and this is a Massachusetts distinction, right? This is where we are a little different than the federal law, that in Massachusetts, a parent or any person in a caregiving or professional position, so it's those are the important words, caregiving or professional position, may initiate a request for an initial evaluation. And so in the case of students who are experiencing homelessness, the shelter worker who's seeing something going on with the family, actually in that caregiving role, in the role that they are providing care to families, would be able to make that referral for evaluation. So while we've had, obviously there's some turnover of special education leadership in the state, and some people are newer, and even those of us who've been doing it for a while, it's just always good to remind ourselves of, who can make that referral in Massachusetts. And it is, these are the exact words from our regulations. And so just, looking at that referral that's coming into you, you're getting that, maybe it's a letter, right, from someone who is representing themselves as being in that caregiving or professional position. We need to accept that and allow that in as a referral for an initial evaluation. And then again, this is where there is a slight Massachusetts difference, is about the timeline. So in Massachusetts, we have to complete those assessments within 30 school days. And we'll talk a little bit more about, sometimes students who are experiencing homelessness in particular might transfer between districts. And so let's dig a little deeper into this and look at that timeline requirement that actually doesn't waiver, but let's just look at that, what happens when students transition between districts. So that timeline requirement, just like I said, it doesn't waiver, it still applies for students who transfer between LEAs, students who transfer between school districts. And so we really want to make sure that there's coordination. And so if you are a district where students are leaving from to go to another district, thinking about who's reaching out, who's making sure that the receiving district knows that an evaluation was started, that they know that, where you got to in the evaluation process. And then, really just if you're the receiving district, getting going as expeditiously as possible to complete those evaluations. And so we know that this is tricky, we know this is challenging, and we really appreciate your kind of awareness of this and your work to make sure that we get these timelines met just as like reliably as we can, because we know how much that matters for getting services for students. So again, I mentioned the 30 working days. So there are a couple of places where the 30 working days school working days, sorry, that's always important, 30 school working days doesn't apply, such as if the parent of a child repeatedly fails or refuses to produce the child for an evaluation, or if you have begun, and again, the child transfers, but let's hold that thought for a second, because there are some important requirements that go with that second provision about the student is enrolled in the school or district of another LEA after the timeline has begun. That's not just sort of, that doesn't sort of give you just the immediate ability to extend the timelines. There are really two important provisions that go with that. And one is you could extend the timeline. And, I do apologize. I think I need to fix this slide. It isn't 60 days, so I apologize. We'll make sure we fix that in the version that we post online. But if the only way that the timeline can be extended is if you're making sufficient progress and you have agreement from the parent and the new LEA, the new school district, to agree to a new timeline by which the evaluation will be completed. So again, you need to be making progress and have agreement from the parent in order to extend the timeline. And I think that's my key takeaway about students who are transitioning between districts, is that we want you to meet the required timeline. And if you can't, then really document that you are making progress towards meeting the timeline and get that agreement from the parent in order to extend the timeline if necessary. So hope there are maybe a couple of questions coming in the Q&A. This is a really important and timely topic, and appreciate your attention to this matter, because, again, I know that we all come into this profession with a real sense of caring, a real sense of purpose for children, particularly those who've been most historically marginalized. And I'm sure we can all agree that an increase in homelessness in the state means an increase of attention on this issue. So thank you very much. Shifting gears on a couple of things. I have a couple of individual slides now to review with you briefly. We're really excited that we have recently released a grant in order to support the reduction or elimination in the use of timeout rooms. It's a competitive grant, and we really hope you'll maybe take some interest in this. So that we put out guidance a couple of years ago. We review it every fall. Because it is still relevant, about our work to support students to be in the classroom as much as possible. We know that students had interrupted learning experiences during COVID. And so now more than ever, we really want to make sure that students have that opportunity to be in the classroom as much as possible. And when students are removed to go into timeout rooms, that is, interrupting their learning further. And so we hope that we can continue to build on ways, and we appreciate the spirit that many schools and districts in the state have embraced with us about working to reduce or eliminate the use of timeout rooms in the state. So we do have this grant available. We hope you'll consider applying. Notice that it's available for LEAs, for collaboratives, for approved special education schools. And so, LEAs include charter schools, include public school districts. So we really want to encourage the application process. We are asking to work to complete the application as soon as February 20th. So if this is something that's of interest to you, something you want to work on with your staff, and we really try to be kind of flexible with how the dollars can be spent. So maybe you want to make some physical changes to your school. Maybe you want to provide more professional development in ways to reduce or eliminate the use of timeout rooms. We want you to think creatively about how to use these dollars to do so. So hope this piques some interest, and we hope to hear from you soon on this. Another quick reminder for you is about LEA policies and procedures. So all of everyone here from the school districts, Just a really strong reminder about the requirement for you to keep current documentation at your level, at the local level, about your compliance with federal and state special education laws and regulations for our review. So making sure that you have policies and procedures readily available at the local level. This is something that you are committing to us when you sign the conditions of assistance. And so we just really want to make sure that you're making those available for public request if it's not already published on your website or any other public platform. So we certainly see districts in the state that have just gone ahead and published their policies and procedures on their website. If that's not, you're not required to do that. If you're not doing that, just making sure that you have your policies and procedures available for upon public request. So appreciate your good work on this, your thinking on this, and also encouraging you to work with each other to share good policies and procedures to in order to make sure that we all learn together about how to continually improve our policies and procedures in the state. I know this is like special ed potpourri, but I do have another topic for you, one that we've talked about before. I just want to come back to this real quick. At the end of the pandemic, our state legislature earmarked $10 million to support individuals who turned 22 during the pandemic to continue to get transition-related services after they turned 22. And, you know, that money came to DESE and we had some flexibility in how to deploy those dollars. And one of our, we did a lot of stakeholder engagement on this, and an important kind of theme that came through was individuals who reached age 22 are no longer in the schools. So even though we want them to receive more transition services, we never came back to the LEAs. We never came back to you to say, we want you to provide these services. Our thinking is they've moved on to adult serving agencies. And so what we've done is we've set up these coordinated post-pandemic transition services through adult serving agencies, through MRC, through DDS, through Mass Commission for the Blind, and through the Department of Higher Ed, through the MA IEP program. So there are options available for individuals who turn 22 during the pandemic, and we made it a wide window from September 20th, from March 10th of 2020 to September 1st of 2023. So just this past September. So there are about 2,000 plus individuals who could qualify for these services. And a challenge that we've had is getting to those young people and helping them avail themselves of these transition services. So I know we've asked you in the past to help spread the word and to be able to, we've created flyers and you've helped to distribute the flyers. We have another idea of how to get the word out, and we're asking for your help in supporting that idea. So what we know on the left side of this panel, which is really important, is that it takes up to 3 contacts, 3 different times that a family receives outreach about an initiative like this in order to engage in it. And so, yes, you have sent our flyers home, and DDS is working on this as well, and MRC is working on this as well. We also have a really strong partnership with the Federation for Children with Special Needs. They are really working hard at getting the word out about this. But we have to keep doing it. We have to keep thinking about inventive ways, creative ways of getting the word out. So what we want to do next is actually for DESE to do a direct mailing to these families. And an important thing for you all to know, might not be commonly understood, is we don't have addresses. While we have a lot of data about students, one of the things that we don't have is the last known address. So what we're asking you to do, and you should have received an email about this if you're a special ed director, we just sent it out today, is if you, we'd like you to go into the security portal and use, download our spreadsheet and do a data match, if at all possible, to give us the last known address. And then we'll be able to send out another round of flyers to these families as well. And maybe just that additional touch, that new contact from DESE might help more families engage in this. So that's one of the key things that we hope you will do. If you have questions about that, don't hesitate to ask. We also just want to reiterate that you can continue to contact families. We would certainly appreciate you doing so. We really need to get to more young people with this initiative. We really want to get to more young people with this initiative. And so we've updated the flyer. The Federation has created a really strong new flyer. We just want to be as clear and up to the point. And so that link actually is, it's actually not the flyer itself. It's a place where families can actually just go and start signing up to get the services. And so maybe that's the one that actually describes the services. Don't listen to me. I've got a lot of links for today. But this is a way to get information out using the flyer. And then on this page, this is actually the one where if they use this link, you can help families just get this information and fill out a form where they can be contacted by the Federation, or you can just encourage families to call the Federation right to their hotline. They have people who are ready to help families if they reach out. So if you know a young person who exited special education upon turning 22 during those dates, we really want to provide some additional services for them. And so please consider helping us out with that. Deeply appreciated. My last special ed update for today is just our upcoming meetings. Here are the dates. Just note, we're going to stick with a virtual format in April. We had hoped to maybe try to do something in person. I think we're going to have to try to come back around to that next year. So we have added this date for April as a virtual session, and we'll come back to you as we continue to think about how do we get back to doing more in person, because we'd sure like to just have more chances just to talk, maybe even a bit more informally, right, than the way that this works. And so, it needs to be a little bit more, I'd like it to be a little bit more of a two-way dialogue than what we're able to do in a platform like this. Okay, next up, some new IEP updates. This is important. I had told you last year that we were not planning, I said we wouldn't touch the new IEP until it gets fully implemented, which is next year, and then we would look at any changes. A couple of little birds landed on my shoulder and said, there are a couple of things missing, Russell, that you really do have to pay attention to. So we have in fact made some very minor changes to the IEP. And one of the things that people wanted was the student information, to put the student name. And the old IEP had that on every page. We're suggesting that it could just go on the first page. And so on our website, posted as of January 23rd, you'll see that there is an updated version of the IEP with the student identification information. It's a little less student identifying information than what we had on there in the past. We always want to be careful with how much we are sharing about a student, right? We have these paper forms floating around in the world. Name and date of birth and student ID seemed a little bit more than what we needed. I did a little asking around to say, we had to have two identifiers, right? Because you could have more than one Russell Johnston in a district. Heaven help you if you do. But if you had more than one Russell Johnston, we want to make sure we have a second identifier. And we felt like student ID is a little safer if like within this broad and challenging world of the safety of information. But student identifier is maybe not as much a lifelong indicator as obviously date of birth is. So student name, ID, and the dates are on the first page. It's important to note that what we require is that you use the elements of our IEP. So the language, right, needs to be there. You need to match however your vendor, however you use the new IEP, you have to use the elements of the IEP. If you worked with your vendor to add this student information on every page, we wouldn't contradict you with that. Like that wouldn't be, you're still using the elements of the IEP, even if you add it beyond one page. So we're putting it on the first page. If you want it on more, you could certainly talk to your vendor about that. But it is something that we heard from you that we heard was important. A change that we made to the content of the IEP is around ESY, around extended school year. And we took out the phrase that ESY is meant to be for the summer break. And our concern with that is that if we said, describe how ESY is provided during the summer break, it perhaps leads you down the wrong road that ESY is only for the summer break. And usually it is in Most cases, that's when ESY kicks in. But there's nothing in federal or state statute or regulation that says that ESY is totally limited to just the summer. And so I didn't, if we kept that language there, I was worried that could create some difficulties for you and potentially us in the future. Why go into that? We just simply took out and just changed the language just slightly about ESY. Again, it's a minor change. We have updated our business rules so that, the IT vendors can see this as well. I would appreciate in your conversations with your IT vendors to point this out because we don't have direct contact with them. And so as you are, working with them, if you could just help to make them aware of these small changes that we've put into effect. And again, really just with an effort to avoid any potential challenges in the future. We've updated those business rules and we will also update the translated versions. That's still in progress, but it'll be done soon because these are very small changes. Glad to see if you have any questions about that. All right, just a reminder, our virtual training of trainers sessions come up next week, January 31st, February 1st. We have about 1,000 people who've signed up so far. Really excited. It's not too late. We're going to take registration right up to the day of the training. We can host up to 3,000 professionals, right? So school and district personnel who need to come, who need to become trainers and take this information back. We want you to come. We want you to be available to attend. And so by all means, registration is still open right up till the 31st. But we're excited about how many people have responded so far. Again, just a quick reminder about our virtual office hours. I've talked about this every month, so feel free to come. I wasn't able to go to December. I'm back every month until June. And then our IEP resources remain available to you. And so I've shared these links in the past. I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, as well as the resources that are coming. Again, these last few slides look very similar, but let me point out an important difference about this bottom one. I'm targeting that we will release the additional forms next month. So our next special ed leaders meeting is February 9th. It's coming fast. So I got to keep working to have them ready for you. But my plan is that we will have additional forms ready either by February 9th or just after. I hope to be able to show them to you on February 9th at the very least about the changes we made. There aren't huge changes. The one that I have talked about in the past is the eligibility flowchart. That's probably the one where there are the biggest differences. Otherwise, we're just trying to make them kind of look the same as the new IEP stylistically and make any kind of small adjustments that we need to make. All right, let's turn our attention now to general supervision. And just a reminder about the components of general supervision that we are working to make sure fit together. So this is a real effort to de-silo our work at DESE, to have more coordination across our teams and more coordination with the Bureau of Special Education Appeals. Here are the things that we have to work on in order to do this. Again, I'm just moving quickly because I've talked about this in the past. But I've had a lot of questions of like, why? Russell, why are you doing this? Why now? Why this set of procedures? If you've looked at the procedures that we released on December 22nd and you're providing public comment, like where did this language come from? Like, why did you do this? And so I want to take a minute and just explain where this came from and why we're doing this now. So first, where did it come from? I've mentioned in the past that, well, actually, let me start with how this slide was laid out. So we monitor you. We have public school monitoring that comes and does what in the past was called tiered focus monitoring. In the future will be called integrated monitoring. Our OASIS team, our approved special education schools team, does the same. They've had their program reviews, their mid-cycle reviews, their integrated monitoring starting next year as well. So we monitor LEAs, we monitor approved special education schools and collaboratives. The OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, monitors us. And they use a model called differentiated monitoring and support, or DMS. And so, here at DESE, we have to sort of align ourselves to, well, what's coming with DMS? What do we need to have in our house in order to, just be ready for a future monitoring review that we have? And, what's important about this is that while that's a driver, right, like being ready for a monitoring review is important, we still really want to make sure that we make this relevant to Massachusetts, that we're not just doing this because, we have a federal requirement to do that. That is important, and we are going to certainly align ourselves to the federal requirements. And we want to make sure that this really matters for Massachusetts, that we use this moment as we have to prepare for a future DMS review to really embody what we know about our state and what we know about our students. And so we took, for example, this guidance that supports states with their work on general supervision and fitting all of these pieces together of monitoring and dispute resolution, for example, and data and technical assistance, how we fit those things together. Our colleagues at OSEP provided us guidance on July 24th, just this past July. That's that first link, the general supervision guidance. And then when you look at, for example, the new procedures that we recently released, you'll see that they are linked to the information that you see in the second bullet there, the DMS protocols. So the OSEP has given us, like, what do they expect to see in a procedures document for integrated monitoring? And so that's really the basis for what you see in a lot of our procedures documents that, again, we've had out for public comment for this past month. So that's a little bit of like, why are you seeing what you're seeing in these procedure documents? Let's talk a little bit about why now, right? Because, you're busy, and here we come along. DESE comes along with like, hey, we're changing our procedures. Why now? So let's look ahead to the end of this. So in December of 2025, that's when we're going to have our on-site visit. So what we need to be doing this year is to update the procedures. So for example, with monitoring, we need to get these procedures updated this year so that we can implement them next year, have a full year of implementation, and then that's when we have our on-site visitors in December of 2025. So that's why we're taking this in this order. So while December of 2025 still seems like a ways away, these are the steps we need to take now to get ready for that, is to just this year update the procedures, fully implement next year, and then look back on both the development and the implementation when we have our on-site in 2025. So I sort of focused a little bit on these procedures, but remember there are multiple components to the work that we're doing with general supervision, and we really want them to fit together. And so I'm going to turn to Jamie now to talk about the updates that we've made relative to the determinations and the forthcoming technical assistance. Jamie, excited also for the SPP APR, all the indicator work that our districts will help us with, being due at the beginning of February. But Jamie, glad to turn it over to you for the LA determinations.
Thank you, Russell. We can move right to the first slide. So as all of you know, we are required, based on IDEA, to issue annual determinations. These are the categories that we are required to issue the determinations. So you're either going to get a determination that meets requirements, needs assistance, needs intervention. Happy to say nobody in our state is needing substantial intervention, but you all know that you got those letters yesterday. Moving on to the next slide. So how did the department make these determinations this year? As you know, for the last couple of years, we've been working on tweaking our rubric, but I'm going to talk about the rubric in just a minute specifically. But how we do this is we assessed each LEA's performance and compliance data. And this includes data from the general accountability system. So your performance data, MCAS data, which also includes your indicator data, but also data that comes from tiered focused monitoring, state complaints, your indicator data, like I mentioned, that gets reported annually as the state performance plan, annual performance plan report, and also any other data that is brought to our attention. We certainly can use that data in making a determination. Changes were made to the rubric this year, as Russell mentioned just a little bit earlier about that guidance that came out in July. We need to make sure that our rubric adhered to the requirements with the new memo that came out in July. So we made a couple tweaks. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I'm going to the next one. So here's the rubric. So some of this looks very much the same. You'll notice that we separated things out this year, and I had talked about this last time about performance and compliance. So the annual dropout rate is the same. The 5-year dropout, 5-year cohort graduation rate is the same. What's important to note is that we weighted that at 1.5, which I know that we talked about the weighting in the past. I just want to make that clear. Indicators 5 and 6 is the same. I skipped over indicator 3. I'll come back to that in a minute. Indicator 5 and 6 is the same, except the weighting for this one is 2, so 2 times for that one as well. So those are the 2 things that we weighted. Back over to indicator 3. This is new. We talked about this last time. So we've looked at performance data, literacy for grade 8. Onto the compliance side, this is where we made some changes that align more with the new OSEP guidance. So you'll notice indicators 4B, 9, and 10. We've always looked at that, but we're looking at that very specifically. And 11, 12, and 13, if you went through TID focus monitoring, that data was collected, then you'll see information in that category as well. These last 2 categories are new. I mentioned this last time, and these are the 2 that are in alignment with the new guidance from OSEP. So in the past, we had a column that was public school monitoring and PRS. Now what we've done is we continue to look at both data from both public school monitoring and PRS, but we've sorted into these 2 different columns as required. Identification of non-compliance, so the number of findings, it's per 1,000 students with disabilities, and then the timely submission of verified correction of non-compliance, again, per 1,000 students with disabilities. I know you probably have a lot of questions about your own individual data. We'll be offering a webinar like we do every year, which will go into this even in more detail. So you'll have more opportunity to get more information on your own individual calculations. Moving on to the next one, Russell. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the requirements. So districts that are assigned as NA, NI, or NSI, which I mentioned, we don't have any districts in our Commonwealth. There are some requirements that need to be adhered to. So the first thing is all these districts that are identified as NA or NI will be getting targeted technical assistance related to special education. This is the same. We are continuing to work on this and growing this to make sure it's targeted to your individual needs as identified by the rubric and your data that we've used to make the determinations. We're going to continue to work with other offices. So if your district is already working with the Office of School Turnaround or the Charter School Office or SSOS, we'll continue to coordinate with them. So you'll continue to get a coordinated approach to your assistance. As I mentioned, the assistance needs to be tailored to your individual data. So we'll continue working on that. And then you will hear from us about additional support and assistance. So if you are an NA or an NI district, there are some requirements. If you're an NI district, you'll be hearing directly from a liaison. If you're NA or NI or even MEETS, we'll give you information like on the webinar that is open to everybody, but required for NI districts. And Russell, I'm just going to go through quickly the requirements for NAs and NIs. This is the same. Nothing has changed since last year, so I'm just going to go over this quickly. So again, you're going to continue to engage if you're already engaging with other offices in our department, including either SSOS, OST, the Charter School Office, my office, public school monitoring. That will continue. You're prohibited from using the flexibilities under the maintenance of effort provision. This is not a change. This is the same. What is not also a change, but something we want to make sure that we're encouraging is, even though it's not required for NAs districts, we do encourage you to engage in improvement planning that includes really looking at root cause analysis and looking at your data. It's not required though. And NIs, much of the same. Same thing with engagement if you're working with other offices. Same thing with you're prohibited from using the flexibilities under the MOE provision. You are required to attend the webinar. We'll be sending that information out. This is not a change either, but just an important note that this is how we determine which districts are required to participate in Making Money Matters. So if you have an NI designation, then next year when you do your application, you'll be responsible for putting aside 2% for Making Money Matters. And then the improvement activities, this is not new either. A liaison will reach out to you directly to coordinate your meetings and set up opportunities to talk about this more, but you'll have an opportunity to go over your data specifically, all NI districts. You also will be engaging in improvement planning, which will include looking at root cause analysis and setting up regular meeting schedules in contact with your LEA determination liaison. I think that's it for that. We're going to shift a little bit to significant disproportionality. As I mentioned before, we did not include this in the rubric this year, so this is just separate and apart, but it also kind of all goes together with all the improvement activities that we've been working on. Just to the next slide, Russell, this is just a quick kind of notice. You all should have received notice already that went out to superintendents, charter school leaders, special ed directors, curriculum coordinators, and school business officers. All the data is already available in Edwin. It has been for a little bit. You should also have received communications if you were identified or identified as at risk for significant disproportionality. You should have received an email which talks about any requirements or any activities that you can participate in. Just a note for your calendars, any required actions and submissions are due in April, and more information will be forthcoming on that as well. And one little thing, Russell, I've gotten a lot of questions already. We did not post publicly on the website which districts were at each designation because we wanted to send out the letters to all of you. So what's on the website right now is in the process of getting updated to the 2023-2024 designations. But I realized that there is a disconnect right now from what was on the website. We didn't want to send post before you receive notification. So that will be changed if it hasn't already very soon.
Great.
I think that's it for us.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate those updates. So just taking a look at, again, those were some deliverables around significant disproportionality and the LEA determinations. Just looping back to the updating of procedures, particularly as it relates to our approved special education schools, problem resolution system, and public school monitoring. Just a reminder, we went out for public comment in December, the December 15th meeting. That's when we went over what the changes are. So I saw a question in the chat about, well, what are those changes? We did explain that in December, so our information is recorded and posted. So if you want to go back and just be reminded about what we discussed that is coming, that's when we did that. So I didn't want to be repetitious today, and we'll make sure that we are continuing to update you about what's coming next. And that's really what I wanted to explain quickly on this slide, is that after the public comment closes, right, so that is today, that public comment closes, we'll be analyzing, synthesizing that feedback, finalizing, and then publicizing our procedures. And then obviously we'll have to loop back around and start to explain more of like, what did we change, what's coming. I anticipate that to be this spring. So it'll take us a little while to take in the public comment, and we want to make sure that we're being very deliberate about what we hear from you and not hasty in that. So the timeline that I would put on that is spring. Also important, remember how I said there are all these pieces that have to fit together. Just be on the lookout that, and I'll make sure you're aware of this in upcoming special ed leaders meetings, that the BSEA is also updating their procedures and will also have a public comment period, just like we have had during this past month. We will make sure that we keep you updated on that. And then I know that in December, when Kelsey LaDuca-Town, our assistant director of the problem resolution system, described what's coming with these new procedures, she was clear to mention that these are the special ed procedures that are out for public comment right now. Kelsey and Barry Barnett and others from PRS are now working on our general education complaint procedures that will also go out for public comment. And when taken together, I think that's when you'll see the totality of what we're working to change as it relates to PRS. So just a reminder, if you haven't already, I know we're down to the wire, but we would sure be glad to have any questions that you might have. I'm sorry, any feedback by a close of business today. So let me stop my share and go